recording. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. The chat window is such a lovely reflection of the various parts of the world that we come from. And the conversation with our President Sunita, just as we were starting, is just so heartwarming, right? And how the pandemic has made it not just possible, but even so pleasurable for us to come together for meaningful conversations like these. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you today on behalf of the CETA India Board. I'm Divya Amarnath and have been a board member for the past few years. And to introduce to all of you, CETA India is a non-profit association of educators, researchers, and trainers from a wide variety of both practical and academic disciplines. And what we share really is a common interest in the intercultural field. CETA India is a part of the worldwide CETA network. And today we have really friends of CETA India, CETA globally, as well as lots of new listeners for joining us today. So a warm welcome to each one of you. I'm going to start now by introducing our first panelist for today. Joins me in conversation, Pratha Shetty, who's an interculturalist based both here in India as well as in France. So Leah, you told us you were one of the first people who spoke up today saying that you're joining us from France. The reason for my joy was in the fact that my first panelist also spends a lot of her time there in France with you. So Pratha has been a visiting faculty in Normandy in France and has conducted intercultural programs for multinational corporations and government institutes like the French Navy. She's been raised in diverse country like India and was raised and inspired by the cultural adaptability that people exhibited to function harmoniously. That's the way that she liked to be introduced. She says she wanted to be a catalyst in making intercultural interactions easier. And that's when she decided to pursue her MSc in culture and negotiations from École de Management in Normandy to become an interculturalist. Additionally, she's one of the newest board members of CETA India. So we welcome you, Pratha.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was a lovely introduction, Divya. Thanks. And hello, everybody. So glad to be here today.
Thank you, Pratha. I must also tell all of you that today's conversation is also about the author that Pratha is. Her children's book, When I Grow Up, is an activity book that helps children learn about inspiring women from different cultures. More details about this book a little later for you. I must also share with you that Pratha is the host of a show called Intercultural Conversations. And her goal with the show is to help people understand each other by giving them cultural context and help them develop empathy for each other. So that's Pratha for us. I'm going to take this moment to also introduce to you our second panelist, Soumya. Soumya is a library educator who works with children aged 6 to 18. When I first read that, Soumya, I must say, I hadn't thought of 18 as a child. And sometimes we think about this, the element of age so differently, right? But yes, it's so lovely that you work with this whole range of children. And to let all of you know, Soumya is a former media and communications professional. She's worked in advertising, PR, radio, as well as print. She's written about food, yum yum, run of a pop-up cafe, co-founded a company that consults on environment sustainability, and she did all of this before diving into education. She says that this affair with education started off as completely accidental initially before she quickly realized that it was fully intentional for her. Soumya looks at the library as a space where people come together to deliberate on individual as well as collective thoughts. And we thought a library was a space for Soumya, pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much, Divya. Right here. And really excited chat with Pratha.
Looking forward to our conversation. I must tell you that Soumya is deeply invested in the idea of books and libraries shaping a child's worldview. But I must also share that my first meeting with her, or rather not first, but my most meaningful meeting with her started during the times of COVID, where we were doing this book exchange, so to speak, in our apartment and a conversation around it. And Soumya told me of this book called Sultana's Dream. I'm telling you, if you haven't read that book and if you're in the space of culture, it's unique, and you must pick up a copy of it. For me, it was not just that this author, a Bengali feminist, 1905 is the time that she wrote this, but the fact that it was she was a social reformer from Bengal. She's created this fictional utopian world in which men wear a parda, and from there started my discovering the myriad facets of how culture and interculturalism and diverse thinking can be introduced to children. So Soumya, thank you very much for the conversations around that book. Really, how much can come from sharing a book? So I was talking to you about introducing a little bit about the book in time, and this is the time I'm going to do that. So when I grew up, this is a children's coloring book, beat that. One that can help children learn about inspiring women from around the world. The book includes a list of women from different countries and how they followed their passion for science, art, entertainment, activism, and business. Really, I think the thought of it being a coloring book and also allowing children to hence learn about amazing women and role models is fascinating for me. Again, encourage you to pick up the book. But really, thank you for joining us in this conversation and seeing how early introduction of conversations around diversity are possible, are nuanced, and can have so much impact. So to the interculturalist in every one of you, welcome. To the parent, educator, and guardian in every one of you, welcome. And finally, to the child in each one of you, that hopes to discover something new about yourself and the conversations that you have with others, role models, and how we can discover them, create them, and be them. Welcome. I'm going to start this conversation with my first question actually to you, Pratha. Yeah, so the question really is, why was this book necessary for you to write?
Firstly, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you everybody for being here, firstly, and thank you to the CETAR board as well to give a platform to talk about conversations such as these. And about the book, actually, it's a personal story as well, and then it's sheer numbers too, right? Actually, when I was growing up, I would read, I don't know if you all remember, but there were Nancy Drew books. She was a female detective. And I would, yes. So I grew up reading Nancy Drew, and after I became a little bit more older, it was Harry Potter. Right. So I was just considering the female protagonists in this book. I always thought as a child that I could kind of be an observer to their lives, but never be them. So for example, I can look up to a Hermione Granger, which is one of the main characters in the Harry Potter series, but I can never be a Hermione Granger or somebody I never thought in my wildest dreams as a child that I could be a Nancy Drew because there was no relatability there, right? So that was the subconscious, I guess, reason why I ended up writing the book. But also as I was growing up, I mean, when I came into my teenage years, there was this US-based show called The Mindy Project, and it had Mindy Kaling as one of the lead protagonists in it. And that's the first time I saw an Indian woman in all her glory, with her dark skin and with all her Indianness and non-Indianness, because she was an immigrant in the United States, on the screen, living a full life, right? And I remember one of my friends telling me, why would they put somebody like her as a lead character in such a large-scale TV show? And I mean, I think I was really too young to realize that maybe it's some sort of conditioning that we grew up with, especially as children and especially as teenagers in India, with respect to skin color and what kind of beauty is conventional and acceptable. But it was just sheer numbers also, right? So when my fellow interculturalists and I, we would sit and speak about representation, especially female interculturalists. I mean, there's only 0.008% of Arab children that are represented in children's books, especially in the United States. And there's only 18% protagonist, the top selling children's books in the world. And it's numbers like this that made me kind of think also, there's only 3.4% of the world's children's books have representation of children who are differently abled. So it was not only my personal journey, but also sheer numbers that kind of pushed me towards it. But I think my tipping point was when a friend's niece, I was speaking to her, and I asked her what she wanted to be when she grew up. And she said she just wants to be married, which I don't think is a wrong choice to have. And this is a 8-year-old girl, right? And that's completely not a wrong choice to have. But then, you know, through conversation and dialogue, I was like, does she know there are other options available as well? And I think that's kind of something that tipped me off, that made me also think that textbooks in India also don't have as much representation. There's a very old study that was done, I think, in the early 2000s, and I'm sure it's changed by now. Apparently, out of the 188 lessons in Indian textbooks, only like 40% of them had either female characters or pictures, images of females as well. So I think that all combined together made me think that I need to contribute in any way that I can to changing or shifting this. So that's why it was necessary for me to write.
Thank you so much, Prathat. That's a whole host of numbers that I think some of our audience was relating to, kind of absorbing as you shared, along with stories, you know, your own story and that of um, your niece. You know, it's amazing how all of that shapes us. I do want to share with all of you listening in that while the first part of this conversation is going to be structured, we're going to open up for your comments and your questions. So yes, thank you, Vani. That's exactly what I was going to say. That if you feel drawn to sharing a comment in the chat window, please go ahead and do so. And you know, if you have questions that are emerging, please put them in the chat window. We can either bring them in now through this conversation or later for you to ask as soon as the structured part of this conversation is over. But I just wanted to kind of share that with all of you. You know, it's amazing how this shaped you as an author, Pratha. And for our educator in Soumya, I'm going to ask you, you know, how do you see an educator, or maybe, you know, for our audience here, a parent or an elder, what's the role that they would play in the reading and learning journey for a young reader, for a younger reader? Soumya?
Yeah, sorry, I'm gonna have my video off for a bit. Yeah. So yes, there are. It's kind of it's a role that can be multi-layered. I think it's um, well, children really like autonomy, right? So they want to be able to choose their books. They want to be able to decide for themselves what they like to read. But quite often, the conventional understanding is that educators, parents are sort of deciding for them and playing roles of gatekeepers. And what then happens is um, they are limited to experiences which are our own, right? Which is, if I do not like mythology, then I'm less likely to recommend that to my child. So I think it is also important to see where we are coming from. What may be our own lived experiences, our own biases, our own way of looking at the world does just flow in everything that we choose for our children. It's a role that is, when it comes to an educator, the conventional understanding of a library or a librarian is also that one must recommend books and one must absolutely hand out books that they should read. They are supposed to be reading these books because they are good for them and they either propagate morals or language skills or uh, take them on a line of thinking. But then again, there are limitations in that thing where uh, by a that when we become aware of this, then we also know.
Soumya, we're beginning to lose your audio a little bit.
Oh, is that okay? Could you then just give me a minute? I'll just check this. Yeah.
Sure. Why don't you go ahead and set that up? And I'm going to respond to what Soumya just said by saying, I remember the first time that, so in our son's school, a practice that the school has is that they bring in a particular publisher, and the publisher comes in with a whole, like a little wish list card that a kid can um, they bring in brochures and books. The kids can go around walking and checking books out, and they get to write down a wish list on a card and bring it back home for the parents to then look at the pricing, etc., and allow them to buy at a school event. And I remember the first time that he did this wish list thing, I was like, did you go by price or something when you were choosing books? Was the first thought that happened for me. Okay, I mean, look at the way biases creep in just the weirdest of ways. um, but I think it's amazing how educators and schools and everybody, I mean, it's an ecosystem sometimes that oftentimes that helps nurture reading habits, especially for the younger ones, and continue to as we grow up, because even as we grow, we ask for references of books, right? And so choice can make such a big difference, when especially somebody's on an early part of the reading journey. So Soumya, thank you very much for sharing your perspective there. I'm going to come back to you, Soumya. Back on this element of representation. And my question to you is, what are the effects of having representation in books? What do you feel are the effects of that?
Yeah, I think before we get into representation, I think we should also look at the idea of childhood, and the understanding of a universal child, which is what most books were earlier approached with. Like, there is a certain representation of children, and it has to be happy and cheerful and all of that. But so that the idea of pain and suffering in childhood has always been a taboo, but that is the reality for so many children. Um, so, I'd like to go back to this quote every now and then. It's by Professor Rudine Sims Bishop. She captured this entire thing in a quote which says, "Books are mirrors and windows. They offer a glimpse of oneself. But when you look at a book and you see something like you see a character like you, then your identity is validated. You feel like you're not alone. And then it also acts as a window, opening out to different realities which you may not be familiar with. And in just that, a child is able to see oneself and also acknowledge realities of other children who may not be like themselves.
So well said, actually. The concept of windows and mirrors in discovering others and yourself is so powerful, Soumya. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. And good to have you back on video as well. Pratha, coming back to you, that question that we were exploring on representation.
Yes,
Lakshmi, absolutely. Sorry, I am so sorry, Pratha, I interrupted you there. I saw the comment about identity being validated and how true that was. And Lakshmi, thank you for sharing. Pratha, please tell us more.
yes, exactly. Just like Subbalakshmi mentioned about identity being validated, I do feel that children's books should either reflect our reality, which is so diverse, actually, or it should reflect a world that we want to create, right? And in that process, when a child doesn't see themselves in this book, they feel that there could be a possibility that they feel that they don't matter or their voice doesn't matter, because that's what I felt when I was growing up, for sure. So this may also come from a bias. And speaking of biases, there's a new study that's done, because before it was between 6 to 7 years was the understanding, but now children start developing biases, including racial biases, that's with respect to identifying the faces as well, from 3 to 4 years. That's when it starts, right? And that could be because of the environment that they are in, or because of the way they're consuming content probably around them. But that's when I think the role of writers, content creators, and even interculturalists becomes important, because there is this one woman who's part of When I Grow Up also. She's part of the book as well. Her name is Li Na, and she's a Chinese tennis player. Yes. And because when she won the Wimbledon, if I'm not wrong, uh, it was widespread across Chinese media, right? And the effect of that was there were more enrollments by young Chinese girls wanting to play tennis. And that led to having more players in the top 100 from China. So it has direct effects there. And another example from the book as itself, one of the mothers who bought the book, she told me that she was reading the book along with her child, and they were reading about Savitri Bai Phule, who was Indian, considered as the first female teacher in India, and she's a reformist, a feminist. And in her description, there's one line that says there was a time in India where little girls couldn't study. Right. And reading that, because her child is born in, some sort of privilege. And she immediately asked the question, why weren't girls allowed to study? Right? Which led to a conversation about that there are some girls that are still not allowed to study in the country. So I think those kind of conversations can only happen when it's in books, especially for children, because that's kind of their first step into exploring a world beyond their immediate caretakers, guardians, and communities. Even though we have our mobile phones now and all our tiki-talkies and we have our YouTubes, but still, I think the first step into exploring a world beyond themselves for children has always been books. So that's why I feel representation matters a lot, and it will always. And that's why I feel all interculturalists should write books. Probably collaborate with other, creative writers, because I think the nuance with which interculturalists are able to see race, identity, and biases, I think is really helpful. So if you think you're not a creative writer, collaborate, and I really feel that that could make a huge difference.
That's a call for action to everybody who's listening. And for those of you who are contemplating writing, thank you. Thank you very much for that invitation, Pratha. This really kind of brings me to that question, or rather wanting to deep dive into that question around who chooses the books and what happens if children were to choose books for themselves. Soumya, given that that's the space that you operate in, any stories or experiences from there that you'd like to share with us?
Yes, and it's quite a contentious thing, about who chooses the books really. There's a very thin line between curation and censorship, and one is to really have a collection, as in a library, where children can find books that they may resonate with, that they may find on their own, discover, explore on their own. And then there are also books that you'd like for children to explore. You simulate an experience for them. So in a place like a library, it is a representation of the community's thoughts on reading, in any space for that matter, be it a school, be it a public library, in a community, anywhere. A library is, in a way, the keeper of collective thoughts and general feelings and memories that the community holds as important. But it's also important to the curators of the library, in a way, also owe it to the community to balance that view, to provide perspectives which they may not really embrace as their own, but in a way also to deliberate on. Could be an opposing view. So in that way, it also becomes a space for challenging one's own way of thinking. This is for both young and old. So in a library which is considered open, children take that call. What do they like to read? What do they like to pick? But there's also a very important role that an educator plays there, which is to provide that space and time for them to have their own sense of exploration, but also in a way introduce them to books which they may not find on their own, which challenges their reading. And this reading could just be about comfort reading or perspectives that they hold, to infuse them with those that may challenge it. So it's like a balance that one has to draw between both providing that autonomy and also curating experiences where they can challenge themselves.
Soumya, I'm going to actually invite you to share the story that you did when we were chatting up a little earlier, the one on how you and your team curated an experience for children to choose books during the pandemic. So that was a lovely one. I'm sure why don't I let you say it?
Yeah, all right. Yeah, so this was when school was online. The library continued to function, And in that sense, we sent out books for children when they were at home. So we would put together these little packs of books for each child based on their interest, based on what we might want them to read. So initially it took off really well. But later, as the pandemic progressed, it was also about how do they get to choose books? Because the element of the library is also about choice that one gets, to explore and discover on their own. So later we said, okay, fine, why don't you just make a list of books and then send it to us, so you're still choosing in that way. But without really going to a shelf and exploring. What one does when you make a list is anything that's popular, anything that you've heard of. So it's not technically your own exploration, but something that has reached your ears. So in that sense, it is no exploration at all. So then we came upon this other idea where we'd started doing a character wish list. And this was something where they had to come up with a list of characters that they'd like to see in books. And this had no direct reference to anything that they have read. They had to think up characters they'd like to see in books. So it could be something as simple as I'd like to read about someone growing up in France, to something as specific as I want to read about a girl who loves football, lives in Scotland, likes puppies, and so the list was detailed, and it meant so much to them that they really took some time to put these lists together. And the humongous task thereafter was to find a book that matches that description. And that's where, the real work began, where we actually just, went through the bookshelves and found books. And we were actually pleasantly surprised and newfound respect for the library, because there was so much there to discover. And we found books that could match those descriptions, if not all of them, at least about 80% of those book wish lists were met. And there also, the biggest learning for me was that when you actually let children decide, they do actually think about diversity in their own little way, and in their own, which is completely based on their lived experiences, but they will. And it's also that sometimes we do question the agency of children, and they do surprise you. And I think one must always acknowledge their agency in these things.
Absolutely, Soumya. And that story had warmed my heart when you had shared it earlier as well. It makes a great segue to the question that I had in mind for you, Pratha, which is, what do you have in mind when you design characters, as an author of a book yourself?
Firstly, yes, Soumya, it's really commendable that you all did this activity. I think the next time I'm going to create a children's book, my data collection first is going to be asking them about the characters, and then reverse engineering it into making it into a book. But for me, Divya, to answer your question, when I grow up is a non-fiction book, right? These are real women, they are real stories, just written in a way which could be fun for a child to read, and also make them think, and then of course ask questions as well. And I definitely wanted a coloring aspect to it too. And the reason why I wanted it to be a coloring book, because then the child stays with that character. No, it's not a character, but that woman's story for much longer, is engaging with that one chapter much longer. And also as they color the skin tones of these women, because there was also a colored illustration right next to it. So when they're coloring skin tone, then they realize that there are multiple skin tones. And because I grew up only coloring the color of a skin peach, so they can also see the diversity in skins as well. So that was one of the main points that I had when I was researching for the book. And then, of course, each of the women in the book are from different countries. So I had to be very careful with my research. And yes, researching primarily on my own was necessary, but also interacting with the women who are from that country to know if, you know, to validate the story of these women as well. But more importantly, I think whenever we are kind of including diverse themes into the lives of children, it's very essential to also check our own biases. And I was also had to check my own privilege, right? So being born in India, I do have a caste privilege that I was born into. And I wanted to make sure that there is some inclusion of that as well. Similarly, with all other characters of the book, how can it encompass a large variety of audience and lived experiences of children as well? Because I think that diversity kind of then makes it relatable and aspirational as well. So yes, because it was a non-fiction book, that was my um, process of kind of curating these women. With fictional books, it's different, and I do have a bit of a fear as an author as well, because when you're writing a non-fiction book, it's you're creating through the story of these women or the characters that are have had a lived experience, but then you have to create an experience. There's a little bit of a fear there because I want to keep myself in check much more deeply.
You know, Pratha, you had me at, I was just thinking of coloring book and characters and, the whole, the diverse characters, when I read your book, when I read about your book also, right? But as a designer, thinking through why a coloring book, right from skin color and uh, having to spend time and soak in that character in that manner as an early experience. I mean, it just sounds invaluable for me. And so thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and yeah, thank you so much. And if I may add also, like because you mentioned illustrations, then I also had to research for illustrators who come from diverse backgrounds too. Right? Because there are not as many authors, female authors and female illustrators who get a platform. So I think in the process, I needed to keep myself in check for that as well.
Lovely. It's for me. I think the space that seems to be emerging here on this webinar is a space of a lot of ideation and co-creation. George, thank you for sharing how this impacts and influences even games, and how it starts at such a young age. So thank you so much for sharing what you're creating through the game as well. um, I'm going to take a pause. Given the comments and inputs that are coming in from our audience, I'm wondering if this is a good time to check in if there are any questions from our audience or any comments that our audience would like to participate in at this point. Anybody who'd like to, because we don't have any questions on the chat window yet. Anybody who'd like to, if you could please just unmute yourself and ask. And after that, anyone who would like to go can just raise hands and I can call out by that.
Okay, there's George with his hand up.
Oh, thank you
Yes.
so much, Sunita, for calling that out. George, please.
Yeah, what is interesting to me is I really would like to see if we could identify a list of the things that we need to pay attention to as we write and create, to look for where are the influences that diminish the person, the object of the discussion or the illustration of that person. You know, we identify some things like skin color, we identify some things like age and size, but I don't expect you to do it now, but I'm really wondering if you have actually identified any kind of list of items that you want to look at to make sure that the personalities that you create are wholesome and whole.
You know, I love that you go ahead, Pratha. Looks like you want to respond. Go ahead.
Yes, it's actually a great question because that came up for me when I was writing the book. I think one of the apart from the aspects you mentioned, another thing that I do look into when I'm also choosing a children's book or trying to write one, the characters themselves, right? So is the ethnic character the center of the story? Are they a protagonist within the story? And if they are not a protagonist, if they are a side character, how many lines do they have? How many times does this character speak? What kind of situations is this character handling? Is this character usually part of jokes? Which is also possible, that also makes a story whole, but how often does that happen? And also comparing different kinds of books, right? So is an ethnic character always sidelined in a particular kind of way, which happens often? Is the color of the skin, like you were mentioning, for example, is it just for the sake of it? Because sometimes you do see even Black characters who are usually shown as light-skinned, right? Which has been a big debate as well in the name of representation. So these are the things that I definitely think about. And keeping children's books aside, just to generally speaking as well, like even while writing case studies. So I was writing a business case study for an alternate MBA program. And I caught myself kind of creating this character who is a CEO or a founder of a startup. And I would usually assign males those characters, right? Because I had my own biases as well. So when I changed that, there were people who started noticing it and actually tweeting about it, right? Because it's that rare. So I think it's not only about writing fiction, it's also when you're writing case studies, these things can matter.
Thank you, Pratha. Given the varied contexts of the audience that is participating here, writing case studies, writing case scenarios for our educational sessions, in all of these, are we considering some of these parameters of what diversity could represent? Thank you for sharing. And George, I'm also, inspired to use what you just asked as a question a little later in the activity that we've planned for ourselves. So thank you very much for that question. I'm going to call out that, Sunita, unfortunately, I'm not able to see raised hands. So if there is anyone who's raised their hand already, if you could please just call out, or the person individual itself could unmute and please go ahead and ask.
Divya, I'd also like to add to what Pratha said. Yeah, I mean, I think I'd also be hyper aware of tokenism, because in the guise of being diverse and aware, there is a little bit of that which is done with the intention of, okay, can we just figure out who's missing and just add them to this? So I think I mean, that's something that I'd be really aware of, and that might just stand out for me. And also, I think anything to do with works for children is that sense of hope, right? I think that hope will matter, that eventually that is something that I find which is a very empowering message in whatever format, whether it's a book or a game, or it's where the child's agency is respected and where the element of hope is the mainstay. I think that has a fantastic impact on children, even if it's something dark and uncomfortable.
Yes. I mean, that's so important, what you said, Soumya. There has to be dark, because people are often afraid of introducing children to darker themes. And to that, I usually say that we teach them about wars in our history books. So if that's acceptable, why can't one introduce them to other realities of life, which are actually happening as well? Right. So definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I agree. I think that the sense of different realities and what it does to how they look at the world, interpret the world matters. And as sensitively as it is, maybe, but if it's introduced to them at a time when their critical thinking also takes shape, they're also likely to be more empathetic in the way they approach in their general humanity. Yeah.
In what both of you are saying, we're talking also so much about how the characters that we design, the characters that we read about, the children read about, are role models, and they look for a representation of themselves. I'm going to take a flip on that and actually also share with you how, all of you, how, uh, when my son was growing up, it was important for me to introduce to him um, lady heroes in books and in stories. And, conversations then emerged on why that was important, or why it was important for him, for me, that he read these stories as well. And over the past few years, the work that I'm doing with women in leadership, I think he began to resonate with it and understand, for me, I think the fascinating moment was when he was able to explain to me equity uh, in a manner that resonated as an adult. And he's 13. So, sometimes it is also about helping our audiences see what they do not see, not necessarily from a role model perspective, but also from being able to encourage diversity in their thinking. And so boys being able to see female characters as strong characters, people of privilege being able to see, people of not as much privilege as emerging heroes. And that's how the word hope struck so positively for me. I see a question that's come in from Sahiba, which is very valuable. And I'm going to ask you, Pratha, Soumya, anybody who'd like to take this up. Is there a way that, or let me ask, Sahiba, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question to us?
Yeah, hi everyone.
Hi, Saima.
Right. Actually, there's so much of content related to unconscious bias right now, but I just want to ask, like, how the upbringing can, like, we can have a check on our unconscious bias so that cannot be transferred to the younger generation.
I can tell you from the perspective of writing, and then probably Soumya can add to that from her lens. Uh, Sometimes it's difficult because it was difficult for me, even though I had to have my own personal parameters in my head that I had. Even after that, it was difficult. So I think one of the things that helped me as a writer was to have diverse people, or a large panel of editors in a way, or people especially who are interculturalists, is whose opinions that I would take. So I would send it across for feedback quite often. And not only were they diverse, but they were also aware of what biases means. So I think that's one solution, to kind of get it cross-checked by people who are aware of biases and know the meaning of what diversity is. That was very helpful for me. And that helped me also remove certain characters from my book.
Thank you, Pratha. Soumya, do you want to weigh? Sorry, we're going to say something else, Pratha? Okay, Soumya, do you want to weigh into that?
Yeah, I think the first step is to actually acknowledge that we all come with our own biases. And if that's the ground that we take, then I think everything that we approach becomes more, we're not absolutely certain about things. The fact that we may think of certain things in particular ways is because of our experiences and maybe the lack of experiences as well. So to be able to look at everything as that's deeply conditioned is one way to actually look at that, and that it's easily transferable. When it comes from an adult to a child, it's easily transferable. So I think to look at that as, yes, we are all biased and therefore we will transfer it, will help of how much you're transferring. That said, I have to also share a particular experience that I've had. I was recently part of a research project where there were 9 of us, all library educators. We were enrolled in this research project, which was about caste. And Facing Caste was the name of the project. And so the journey was really about our own understanding of our caste privileges and what it really means to us, because it's very easy in India to just take everything for granted. If you come from a certain caste privilege, the experiences that you have, the access that you have is, you can take that for granted without actually being completely aware of it. So what then happened in this project was a year of being totally uncomfortable about my privilege, a year of being really confronted by the things that I thought were just part of life. And I think every now and then, if we do make ourselves uncomfortable, we may just look at what kind of biases we hold. And every now and then, if we actually chat with people who have the opposite view, then we may, in those moments, find the conditioning that we have. And then, of course, coming across books that challenge our own perspective definitely will be able to bring that up, and in quite apparent ways. But it's also about just opening yourself to it. That's going to be really hard, and because we are also just deeply conditioned that way, it's going to be hard. But I think really making yourself uncomfortable opens out to these opportunities.
Thank you, Soumya. And Saiba, that was what I was going to just start by saying. The fact that you've asked this question itself is a great starting point, right? The fact that we realize that we possibly do hold unconscious biases is a great starting point. And I love what both Pratha and Soumya shared. For me, a lot of times, learning happens from conversations in design. And, especially when there are people who are from different backgrounds than me. And going into those conversations with a curious mind can make a whole lot of difference. Just asking why questions. Why do you feel so? Why do you think so? It opens up a lot. And of course, lots of inputs that have come in from both Pratha and Soumya here. I'm thinking this might be a good time. Yes, Pratha?
Just a quick note there, and I think as an intercultural trainer, I have a feeling we often do intercultural training in isolation. So we usually train, Indians about France, and it's done in isolation. And I do believe and I'm sure other interculturalists will agree as well, that it has to be integrated at some point, because talking about discomfort and what kind of conversations that leads to, and I think that can happen in that kind of an environment where we can kind of integrate cultures while we are training, as opposed to training in isolation. Sure. And I hope that happens someday. Because with
Yes.
with virtual trainings, it can be a possibility, hopefully.
Yeah, and the example that you gave, Pratha, was across geographical differences. I'm thinking it applies to varied contexts. I mean, even when we're thinking an organization that wants to bring in diversity education, and so they think, oh, unconscious bias for all the men in the company, and you're like, oh my goodness, right? So I found brilliant experiences that happen when we're doing unconscious bias training with all genders in the room. Quick exercises that do, you visualization exercises about CEOs, pilots, all those professions, and have people share the descriptors of the gender. And you find that not just men, but even women hold the same biases. And so it's often the process of uncovering biases becomes easier while we stay in our discomfort, when we realize that there are people like us who have or hold the same unconscious biases. And even that process of peeling the onion becomes slightly easier. So yeah, totally agree.
May I also share something on this? I was tempted to share this experience of reading a particular book with the children that I work with. This book is about a Syrian refugee boy who's escaped the war, taken shelter in London, is new to the place, cannot speak English, and is having trouble making friends. The story is about this boy. And so the narrator of the book wants to be his friend. But the idea of reading this book was nowhere in the book is the gender of the narrator mentioned. There is no name mentioned. There is no reference to the gender. Um, while reading this book, it was an exercise in figuring out how each of them were interpreting this narrator. Yeah, so some of them felt like, okay, so this character likes football, so has to be a boy, or is very close to mom, so has to be a girl. So at each point, we pause to look at our own way of thinking, which again is, deeply rooted in our conditioning and bias, right? So, and the author's intention was also to facilitate this deliberation. And it was revealed only at the end who the narrator is and the gender identity of this narrator. And it was a brilliant experience to go through this book. The name of the book is The Boy at the Back of the Class by Anjali Roth. And it also brought to our focus not just our own biases, but also how we look at the idea of problem solving. And because the child is 10 years, and so children who are age 10 actually solve problems which could be of national importance. So there was that as well. So while we looked at our own conditioning of gender, we also looked at how we looked at agency and pursuit.
Thank you, Samya. A brilliant read, opportunity for some of us like Saiba who are thinking of working with our own biases to pick up this one and engage with it. Talking of engagement, time we get to that one in a slightly different context. So what we're opening up for is the next segment of our webinar, which is really an activity in design. So what we'd like for all of us to do is think about an audience that you would like to share a story with, and then design the character for that story. So all you need to think about is an audience, and then think about a character. I'm going to just tell you the logistics of this and how we're going to do the activity, and then I'll come back to any questions that you may have. We're thinking of this as a breakout activity where we'll break out into small groups of 3, allowing each of us about 5 minutes per person to talk, in terms of speak time. So we're saying about 15 minutes of activity. You go out into this group, all 3 of you agree on, an audience that you'd like to create this character for. I'd like you to keep in mind what George said a little earlier. What are the various dimensions of a character that you may want to consider as you're designing the character? When you come back after the breakout, we're going to invite maybe 2 of you, to 2 groups of you all to share the audience as well as the character and some elements of how you designed. So I'm going to take a pause and check if anybody has any questions at this point before we guide you to your breakouts. Okay, so I did a 5-second count in my head. Seems like we're, mulling over the idea or ready to go into breakouts. So let's have you go into these groups. Okay, the groups could be 3 to 4 people. Oh, thank you so much, Jill, for putting that out for all of us. The groups would be between 3 to 4 people, and you have to think of an audience, create a character that you'd like to introduce to that audience. And we'll start in our breakout rooms now. Have fun. So Lucy, Prashant, Elsie, if you'd like, there would have been a pop-up that emerged for you, and you can just click on it and join the breakout room.
Hi Divya, sorry, I'm unable to, I haven't clicked on the join now as I won't be able to participate really. I wanted to hear out what was going on. So maybe I could do that there, or I'll just wait here till everyone comes. You
could just, in that case, you could just wait here, and when the audience comes back, you can listen in. But thank you for letting us know, Prashant.
Not at all, no. Thank you.
All right, I'm trying to get everyone into their rooms.
Thank you, Jill.
Looks like we've got.
Prashant mentioned that he wouldn't be going into a room because he's not going to be able to engage at this point. So
that's fine.
We don't know about Richa, but this is good for now. Thank you so much.
We've got 3 rooms with 4 people in each of them, and then one room which is just waiting for Richa to join, and that's it.
Oh, okay. All right. So we've got 3 rooms hence.
Yeah, and we've also got Yeah, we've got a fourth room, but we're just waiting for Richa to join it.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's good.
All right. Richa, I'm going to just check in with you if you'd like to join a group at this point. This would be a good time because it will still allow you some conversation. Okay.
I just realized I put Somya in one of the groups by accident.
That's okay.
I was just wondering where
Please.
Soumya actually.
I was going to say, do either one of you want to join room 6?
I'm good. I was gonna go for a water break.
Okay, no worries.
And I was just wondering, Divya, so Soumya and I had made a list of books for recommendations. Probably we can share that in chat at some
Yeah,
point.
let's do that in chat in the end.
So I had a list and Soumya has a list of books which
Yes.
have diverse characters.
I have that in my list of questions as well.
We can also invite, Divya, when you're sharing the list, invite all the participants to share their own recommendations in the chat as well.
Sure. Thank you for that, Jill.
And Divya, it's 9:08. When did you want me to bring them back?
We'd said 15 minutes. I think we started at 9.
About 9:05.
3 or so. Yeah, 9:05. Okay.
Okay, so about 9:17, 9:18?
9:18. Thank you.
Okay, cool.
Hi, Vipula. I see that you're back.
Just wanted to comment as well. It's a lovely webinar. I've been really quiet because I'm really sick. I'm super unwell. That's the only reason I've been very quiet.
Jill, thank you for being here, doing all this despite being so unwell and, with little one also. Yeah, thank you. Hey, everyone, welcome back. That was some activity, wasn't it?
We would have definitely needed more time.
I can only imagine. So when the pop-up came for me asking, do you really want to break them and bring them back? I was in a dilemma, but I said, given we have 15 minutes for all of us to wrap up and go back, I don't know, to create new stuff. I said, maybe we can come back for a 15-minute engagement. So thank you, Sunita. And, I'm glad that at least perhaps it got some creative juices going and some conversations going. Invitation. Anybody who'd like to share?
Yeah, I would like to share. It's not easy to when I mean for more than 10 minutes we were still discussing about the audience, and then when it came to the character, who the character should be, then we we ran into all sorts of elements as whether it should be whether it's race, gender, color, and then physical disability, and then whether the character should be poor or privileged. I mean so many elements. So it was just one character design, and to come to a decision the kind of a character we want to have itself is I mean, so much brainstorming was happening. So I'm sure it's not an easy task for writers. I mean, yeah, that's what I would like to say.
Madhuri, thank you. You have Pratha grinning ear to ear as she was absorbing what you were saying. And the intention for all of us in doing this activity was just to help us think about the characters. It was to introduce to us the impact that can happen when we truly think of just the character, right? And we thought we'd also introduce that element of share the audience, because that often brings context. Is there anybody who'd like, thank you, Madhuri, for sharing. Is there anybody who'd like to actually tell us a little bit about the audience you chose and some dimensions of the character that you designed?
So probably I can give a little bit of insight into what character we've chosen. My name is Nisha, and dialing in from Malaysia. It's almost midnight here, so bear with me.
Wow.
Wow. So the character that we decided was a refugee child who's sort of brought to a new country and sort of trying to adapt with the new cultures, learning from the people around, and sort of just trying to be part of a new community far away from home, or what that child would have. And specifically, we had thought about, with the current ongoing war in Ukraine, a child from Ukraine, and how the adaptability and how the settings and the changes eventually occur for the child. We do also believe, the audience would be children. It would have to be something very interactive, not just like a text-filled book, but a lot of drawings, illustration, which sort of helps most of the kids to visualize some of these things that is very relevant in this current situation. So I don't think there has, or maybe we're not aware of any recent books that have been launched in essence with the Ukraine war and how children are sort of dealing with it or trying to understand the other side of, refugee children. So that's something that George and myself had discussed together. George, anything you want to add?
You're on mute,
George,
George. Yeah.
you're on mute.
Not really much. I think you've covered it pretty well, but the thing that comes to my mind here is that we thought that it would be a book that could be part of a school curriculum, and in order to shape it, we would do interviews of students, children, about their experience of this, as well as teachers who are savvy about leading it. So another character in there might be a very what do I want to say, functional teacher who recognizes the dynamics that go on and can demonstrate interventions that are effective.
Thank you, George and Nisha.
Listen, I need to go. I appreciate, this has been a wonderful session. I got to start my own in a couple of minutes. So thank you all, and continue on and create ideas. Bye-bye.
Bye, George.
Bye-bye. Thank you, George. And Misha, I think, Sunita, you look like you're dying to say something to Misha. I just want to say thank you for joining us at midnight. I mean, this is just, it's a subject that I think really matters, and your staying here with us really matters. But Sunita, did you want to say something as well?
Yeah, I just think that this is a plot by Pratha and you to make us all into authors. She says that we are only interculturalists, now we are going to be authors as well. So this is just your secret way of getting us to be that,
Yep, and we have Soumya here who's going to file all the copies that we share with her. Of course, she's going to screen them and all of that, so make sure that we're at standard, but into the various libraries that she curates for.
Yeah.
I'm glad that was an experience. I'm going to actually check if there's another team that would like to share with us audience and elements of the design of the character. And I did take the host privilege of putting everybody on mute in between, because I did realize that there was some static there. So anybody who'd like to speak, just unmute yourself and please go ahead and share.
Hi.
Okay. Yes. Hi, Vani. Yes.
We had a similar discussion like what my previous person shared from Malaysia.
Nisha.
Sorry, Nisha.
Yes.
Yeah. See her name there. So yeah, and in my group there was Subbalakshmi. She brought up a point saying, are we being biased in coming up with even the audience thinking that they need a specific story? And that just tripped me up, because even though the audience she brought up and Berenjere also had, they both coalesced for me, because I teach refugee children and I'm in Germany, they are in Germany, they are from Syria and Ukraine. And, they, as in teach in the sense I volunteer to do homework with them, right? I myself immigrant, so they kind of feel that it's okay to ask me questions, because I had to learn German as an adult. So I could, those two things coalesced for me. And then came the question after we started designing, and like, do we need to, and are we being, so that was really a great thing. So from all this, I'm going to take that as like, because I know school is a struggle for everyone. So I think, there is something in that idea, what we came up with. So I want to say thanks to my co-creators, Berenjere, Subbalakshmi, and Poonam. So, but this was what I'm going to take away today. So that was like really an insight for me, even though I've been working in allyship, and as a communication coach. So I always think about how do we communicate respectfully and be kind and all that. Yet this could also be an unconscious bias that we're carrying. So that's a great session that we had. Like, wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome, Vani. And to Subbalakshmi, who asked the question, I do want to respond by saying that when we curated the activity, when we thought about calling out an audience from the perspective of perhaps an age group, or even because we're in this audience, we expected people from different backgrounds to come in. Some of us were coming in as, parents and educators. Some of us were coming in as interculturalists. It was a varied audience that we were expecting today. And so we wanted for you to feel comfortable in designing as per the audience that you're comfortable working with. And, that was the intention, but the way that you called it out, and perhaps when it happened in your breakout, it must have been like a oops, kind of a blooper that came up there. Lovely. Thank you so much for sharing.
There's a really nice comment by Carolyn as well. She says, we discuss gender neutrality in characters. Go ahead, Carolyn. Can you say something about what emerged?
Well, we started out by like I said, general neutrality of characters. And then Lucy raised the issue that gender neutrality characters could itself be a bias. And then I asked the question if all of the discussions were about things written in English, where you can kind of not too convolutedly make things gender neutral when you want to. But there's some languages that you absolutely can't do that in. It's built into the grammar. And then, of course, I didn't get a chance to respond to this in our group, but sometimes in English we could use they as a plural, but now that's becoming such a political hot button too, because of all of our madness. You can tell my bias, our madness about gender and sex and all of that, and trans. So it gets complicated, but that's that. I'll stop there.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I mean, lots to think on all there. Jill says, if you all have children's books recommendations to share, please put them in chat. And let's get a list of great books we can share with children that are inclusive and more representative. For sure, I'm going to put the first recommendation off my head.
That was what we were going to plan on doing. And I'm going to invite actually Pratha and Soumya as well. With the backgrounds of the work that you're doing, we'd love to see your recommendations here. Perhaps what we could do is kind of keep all of this in the comments and share. Yeah, just copy comments. Absolutely, lots of interesting recommendations there.
Yeah, I've just copy pasted. So Soumya and I had exchanged messages about the list of books that we would like to share as well. So I've added both mine and Soumya's recommendations in the chat. Hopefully this will be helpful. It's a really cool list, as Soumya and I discussed. And somebody mentioned Tara books. I love them.
Yeah, that's me, Pratha. That's my favorite one for children, especially when I'm coaching families that are moving across cultures. The London Jungle Book, it's a wonderful one. Looks at how a tribal artist from a remote village in India experiences London, and the metaphors he uses just drawing. So it's art and it's literature at the same time. It's beautiful.
Oh, lovely. Thank you, Sunita.
Yeah.
Well, so we have a minute more to go. And so as the books thank you so much, Vani. As the books keep coming in, copy them and file them away. And I'm going to take this moment to thank all of you for the time and investment that you've made in this conversation that really matters. Pratha, Soumya, any final words?
Firstly, thank you, everybody. Thank you for firstly engaging also and asking really good questions as well. And hopefully in the process, you all were able to discover something about either your biases or yourself, or kind of reflected on your childhood and what are the kind of conditioning that you grew up with, and also see the kind of conditioning that we sometimes pass on to a younger generation, and that we collectively then be mindful of that, because how a generation grows up defines the future. So hopefully we, as not only as parents but as a society, are able to raise children so that we can, in a way, that we have a much better future. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Pratha. Samya?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been such an enriching session, not just now, but I think I look at it from the time we actually started our conversations, Divya and Pratha. I think it's really brought me to focus on some things which I think in my practice, I've kept it as something which is granted. To bring this up here has also been a process of understanding what holds dear to me. And thank you for all the questions and being such an active audience, all of you. And I've in the questions that you've asked and in these interactions, I'm taking back a lot more that I can deliberate on. So thank you to each one of you who joined in from different time zones. And thank you for all that time that you've given us.
And may I say
Thank you on that.
and may I say a big thank you to Divya for such a beautiful moderation, for giving time to everyone, including the audience. So thank you, everyone. Jill, have we stopped recording now?